Malvika madam. Malvika madam. Good morning, one and all present here. I welcome each one of you for this webinar today. Before we start the session, I would like to brief you up about our university and about our today's guest speaker of the webinar. Gujarat Law Society, GLS, established in the year 1927, is one of the largest and oldest educational institutions in the state of Gujarat. GLS was promoted by likes of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Iron Man of India, Sri Ganesh Mavlankar, the first speaker of the Lok Sabha, Sri I.M. Nanavati, an eminent legal luminary. GLS offers education from kindergarten to doctoral studies. Since its inception, GLS took a pioneering role by offering programs in several disciplines such as business management, computer technology, commerce, business administration, education, law, and humanities. All the courses being offered at GLS have high level of preference and acceptance in the student community as well as in the corporate fraternity. Under the visionary leadership of its president, Sri Sudhirbhai Nanavati, GLS University has been established with an objective of providing an ideal and creative learning environment and continuing the tradition of excellence in education of the sponsoring body GLS. The university is currently hosted on a state-of-the-art campus within the heart of the city, fully equipped with advanced technological tools to facilitate education. GLS has been awarded several times at national and international levels for its outstanding contribution to education. Following it is a brief summary of the awards and recognitions received by GLS University in the recent times, including Gold Star Award by Indian Achievers Forum Bangkok for Excellence in Education, Best Educationalist Award by Awakening India for Modifying Society Forum, Award for Best Educational Services Lifetime by All India Academic Applied Psychologists Association, and so on and so forth. Our institution called GLS Institute of Commerce, GLSIC, regularly organizes seminars and workshops for an all-round development of our students. Today also, we have organized a webinar on a very important topic by a professor from IIT. India is globally known for its great spiritual and religious and political leaders like Gautam Buddha, Mahavir Swami, and Mahatma Gandhi, who talked about Satya and Ahimsa and worked for establishing a nation that has an environment of total peace and absence of violence. However, recent rising trends in criminal cases illustrate a totally different story altogether. Not only this, the crime rate among children has increased to many folds during last few years. It is a matter of great concern for all of us. We need to understand as to why is this crime rate among children is on the rise. So today we have organized a webinar to learn about this in detail from an expert who has worked extensively and rigorously on this topic. So today among us, we have a very bright and scholarly professor, Dr. Malvika Tyagi, to give a seminar on the topic, Economic Approach to Crime, Law and Deterrence, the Empirical Analysis of Juvenile Crime. Dr. Malvika Tyagi is currently Assistant Professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT, Jodhpur. She was previously Assistant Professor at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Bhopal, and Nalsar, Hyderabad, the best university in the field of law, and visiting postdoctoral fellow at London School of Economics. Her research interests lay at the intersection of law and economics, political economy, development economics, institutional economics, economics of crime, behavioral economics, and empirical economics. Her research work has been published in journals such as Constitutional Political Economy, Economic and Political Weekly, EPW, and Journal of Social and Economic Development, and she has also written columns for print and online news media. Before we let Professor Tyagi start her session, I would like to request our principal, Dr. Avni Shah, to welcome our guest. Dr. Avni Shah herself is a young, dynamic, and prolific leader who leads from the front. I request Dr. Shah to do the honor to welcome our esteemed guest, Professor Tyagi. Dr. Avni Shah, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hastiman Sagra. Good morning, Dr. Tyagi, my faculties, and dear students. I, Dr. Avni Shah, Director, Faculty of Commerce, GLS, IC, extend my warmest welcome and heartfelt welcome to one and all. Friends, GLS University organizes conferences and seminars for the overall development of the students and professors around the year. We try and find faculties and speakers and orators from different areas who can not only add to our knowledge, but also widen our horizons and wisdom of our understanding. Today, we have Professor Dr. Malvika Tyagi, Assistant Professor at the IIT Jodhpur, who is an outstanding research scholar. Her work ranges from law to economic development all around. Today's lecture, which is themed on economic approach to crime, law and deterrence, and empirical analysis of the juvenile crime. This will provide an insightful learning to our students and faculties, both regarding the increasing crime and the cybercrime. I welcome Dr. Tyagi on behalf of GLS Faculty of Commerce once again and request the students to enhance their knowledge and wisdom as much as possible from the learned person. Welcome and God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Professor Shah and Professor Sagara, for very kind and extremely generous words. I'm very, very happy to be here. And I hope that I will be able to live up to the expectations of my hosts as well as the students who are attending, and throw some light on the issue of crime through the approach of economics. Okay, so if you allow me, I would like to now share my screen and start. Okay, so as has already been conveyed to you by the very kind introduction that I received, the topic that we're going to look at today is specifically juvenile crime. The word that is used more often is delinquency, and the reason is that there is a reluctance to associate the word crime with a young offender. Okay, so the term is delinquent has to do more with mistakes and not necessarily crime. That is the reason that the term delinquency is generally used. So this is what we're going to do today. So the first part of the title says economic approach to crime, law, and deterrence. Okay, so generally when we think of the issue of law and how law would be able to achieve deterrence, specifically in terms of crime, and here today we're going to look at a specific kind of crime, which is juvenile crime, and even within that, heinous crime. So crime that is specifically harsh or severe or serious. Okay. Now, these are things that all of us are aware of intuitively, or as laymen, we hear of these things, right? But what I'm going to try and do today is to introduce you to an economic approach to these questions. how is it that an economist would look at the issue of crime, and how law, or we'll see in the model specifically punishment, can help to achieve deterrence. Okay, so we're going to look at what is the theoretical background of the economic approach to crime law and deterrence. Okay, so that you get a sense of the context of what we're talking about, right? And also an introduction to the topic. And then that's going to be followed by my own work, which is more of an empirical analysis. So the empirical analysis is grounded in the theoretical approach, and in some ways, although adopts the economic approach, it is also critical of the shortfalls of the economic approach. Okay, so that's what the aim is today. So just give me a second. I'm trying to minimize the window so that I can, yeah. So what is it that the economic approach to crime, law, and deterrence is? It centers on analyzing the effect of the law on criminal behavior, okay, amongst other things. And we'll see what those other things are that the economic approach tries to do. And this criminal behavior, or the potential criminal, is assumed to take decisions as a rational agent. Okay, of course, the minute we think of a potential offender as a rational agent, you might have all kinds of questions and objections in your head, and we'll look at that also at the end of the session, right? But this is how economics sees a potential offender, as any one of us who is going to take decisions as a rational agent, which is that he or she is going to be able to make decisions by weighing the costs and benefits of committing crime. That's how an economist would see it. And this is something that you must be familiar with, in some of your undergrad courses, in, for example, microeconomics, right? A rational agent weighs costs and benefits and takes decisions accordingly, right? But that's not it. The economic approach is also, in addition to individual behavior, is also mindful of state costs, as in the costs that the state would have to undertake through law or policy to bring down crime. Okay, and the state, while doing so, would also, in turn, be mindful of the tendency of a potential criminal to behave one way or the other. Okay. So starting with the individual's point of view, okay, the more serious the crime, the harsher is the punishment going to be. This is something that an individual can think of. But at the same time, the higher the returns. Okay, this return could be monetary, this return could be psychological, it just gives them pleasure, or, so you can think of return even in terms of non-monetary benefits. Okay. Now, when we think of punishment, right, this has a probabilistic element in the sense that there is some probability, and the individual knows this, that he or she may be caught, but he or she also may get away with the crime. Okay. And it's fair to assume that both punishment as well as probability of punishment, now we're looking at the state side of it, the action of the state. Okay. Both of these would increase with the seriousness of the crime. Okay. Punishment would be more severe the more serious the crime is. And the probability would also be more because the state is going to allocate more resources in curbing that crime precisely because it's more serious. Okay. Now, even though the variable that we're looking at here is seriousness of crime, you could also and we'll see in the following reasoning, you could also think of it as number of crimes, okay, not necessarily just seriousness of crime when you're talking about an individual's point of view, right? So I'll tell you what P prime and F prime are here, and so this is just what we are explaining. So if you think of P as the punishment, okay, P prime would be the change in punishment with the change in seriousness of the crime, what we think of as dp by dx, if some of you are aware of it. Even if you're not, that's fine. And the same with F prime. So fx is the return of committing the crime. This is also a function of the seriousness of the crime. Okay. And again, like we've already said this in words, the more serious the crime, the more would be the return. So F is the change in the return with the change in the seriousness. So df by dx kind of a thing. Okay. So even if you don't pay attention to these symbols, if you've got the gist of what I've just said verbally, that should suffice. Okay. So what we can say is that both returns and costs would increase with the seriousness of the crime. Okay. And most of the time, what is going to happen is that the expected punishment would exceed returns, right? And that would deter a person from committing crime. So let us try to visualize what we've just said verbally. Okay. So on the y-axis here is the return to a person from committing crime. On the x-axis, you see the seriousness of the crime. Okay. The payoff to the criminal is this curve y of x. Okay. Because we've seen that the payoff or the returns are an increasing function of the seriousness of the crime. The punishment also, it increases, and the individual function in the sense that punishment increases with the seriousness of the crime. Okay, but the fx here is efficient, right? There is also a probabilistic element, which is why we're calling it expected punishment. Okay, so for a given seriousness of the crime, am I audible? My internet is unstable. Dr. Sagara?
Yes, it's audible.
Okay. Right, so Px here is the probability that you're going to be punished, right? And therefore, instead of just seeing punishment as a standalone variable, there is some kind of probability element. So you can think of this as, for a particular level of crime, only 1 out of 4 times will you be punished. That is what the probability is. Okay. And if this is the kind of mental picture that a rational agent who is to decide whether to commit crime or not has, then in this case, you see that throughout this range, your expected punishment is exceeding your payoff. So crime would never occur. Okay, this is for demonstration purposes. Now, what may happen, however, that there might be a window. Okay, so this window that you see here, in which case the opposite happens, that the expected is falling short of the payoff to the criminal. Okay, or in other words, the payoff to the criminal exceeds the expected punishment. Okay, and so this gives the potential offender to take advantage of this fact. And what then this potential offender, who is a rational agent, going to do? He or she is going to do the same thing that we do when we make decisions about other things. We're going to optimize or maximize our net return from committing crime. Okay, so you may have seen this condition in microeconomics, that what is going to be the optimal level, so to speak, here is the optimal level is going to be when the marginal return from the crime would be equal to the marginal expected cost, right? And you may be familiar that the slopes here are precisely that. Okay, so you can think of this as long as your payoff, which is all these points, exceed your expected punishment, you're going to keep committing more and more serious crimes. Okay, but beyond this point, X star, what we're calling, which is the seriousness level of the crime, which is optimal for you as a rational potential offender. Once you exceed this point, you're not even, yeah. So here what's now happening is that your expected punishment and payoff start to not pay off in the manner that you would expect. Okay. Now, if this is what we expect a potential offender to act in accordance with, what are the following law or policy implications for deterrence? Okay, so both increase in punishment and probability of punishment. So one is the severity of the punishment. You can think of this as how long, say, your sentencing is, whether it's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, for committing that particular crime. Okay, so that's F. That's one part of your expected punishment. The other part is probability, right? And is the product of those that is going to determine your expected punishment, like we've seen. Both of these will reduce crime if they are increased. Okay, severity should deter a person from, and also an increase in the probability that a person would in fact be punished. Okay, which is if the person is actually caught, convicted, and so on. Even with that, your seriousness of the crime would reduce, right? And like I said, you can do the same analysis if you want to. Instead of calling it seriousness of the crime, you want to call it number of crimes. Okay. So what policy implications now do we have? Given that a potential offender would respond to increasing severity of punishment as well as increasing probability of punishment. Okay. We know that both of this is going to reduce crime, but our problem as a policymaker or as a legislator is to figure out which one of these two avenues should we use in order to achieve deterrence. Okay. And what then is becoming important for us is the costs that we have to incur as the state. Okay, that's one of the primary things that we have to look at. You may be familiar that our resources are limited, and therefore our resource allocation has to be economical. Okay, so it's not like to achieve deterrence, we can keep spending unlimited amounts. So we have to think of how to achieve deterrence while being mindful of minimizing the cost to us as the state. Okay. And the cost to the state, if you think about it, would be higher if it is through the probability avenue that you want to achieve deterrence. Why? Because if you want to achieve deterrence to increasing probability of being caught and convicted and so on, you would require more resources and spending by the state. You would require more policing, more police personnel, more patrolling specifically, more enforcement efforts, and more efforts at investigation process and so on, right? And if instead you follow the severity avenue, which is that you simply make the sentence for the seriousness of the crime very harsh. Okay, you make it severe enough, right? In this case, the cost is going to increase because the process is going to be the same, right? In the process that leads up to conviction, everything is going to be the same. It is just that you are going to be, as a potential offender, going to be bearing the cost, in the sense that the severity of the sentence is how you're going to pay. Okay, so in a sense, you can think about it as the state transferring the cost to the potential offender. Okay. And like I said, because the expected punishment has these two elements, right? It is better to achieve deterrence by increasing expected punishment through the avenue that is less expensive for the state. Okay. So what is the conclusion here? We're trying to say is that increase severity rather than probability, if you're looking at things from the economic perspective, right? So let us also briefly see this through an example, what we've seen intuitively. Okay, so look at this. So here, probabilities here are decreasing, right? So here the probability is P, right? A punishment is denoted by F, and expected punishment is P into F, right? Now look at what is happening. Say the probability is perfect. The state system is spending so much amount of resources that it is certain that an offender would be caught, right? And the punishment in this case is 10 years. Your expected punishment is 10. Okay. Now look at what's happening. As your probability is going down, right? Which means that the resources that the state is allocating are also going down. But look at what's happening to punishment. This is increasing, right? Your expected punishment is still staying the same, right? So why not use a severity avenue to give the kind of a signal to the potential offender that this is going to be the expected punishment that you're going to have to be faced with if you commit crime, right? Now, so like I said, what we were doing initially and what I've tried to do so far is give you a brief kind of overview of a very simple economic analysis of achieving deterrence, criminal deterrence through law. Okay. Now, some of you may already have some questions in your head, right? For example, one of the foremost one is a potential offender really rational in the sense that the rest of us are? Okay, this is something that has been addressed in the literature, and I have also tried to address this in a particular manner that I'm going to demonstrate through the work that I have tried to do, right? And then remember that what we've studied today is a static model. Okay, so the decision making is happening, does not, at least in the sense of model, is missing a dynamic element, in the sense that when you make decisions today as a potential offender, you think of the future. So there should be a discount factor, right? So you may or may not have come across dynamic microeconomic models of decision making. Okay, these dynamic models also exist, founded in micro behavior, right? So you have a discount factor in the sense that you place some value on the future today while making decisions today, right? And these dynamic models have also been looked into by economists, right? The approach has been the same, but a dynamic element has been introduced in decision making, right? But more or less, the approach is the same, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to move to a specific issue that I'm concerned with, and some of you also may be concerned with, in the background of what we have seen. Okay. So what is the motivation of the work that I'm going to present? The reasoning that we've seen so far, right? The fact that severity should be what we should be focusing at, rather than probability of punishment, is the way to go if you think of it from the point of view of the state, right? Of course, when the state makes laws, does not really explicitly mention, but it seems like that's what the dominant reasoning is, right? And therefore, there was post one of the 2012 incidents, right, of a heinous crime, the age of majority for juveniles was reduced. What do we mean by age of majority? We mean the age at which a juvenile, a child, or a teenager, or a person who's transitioning from adolescence to adulthood, at what age is he or she going to be considered an adult when it comes to ascribing responsibility to him or her for the crime that they have committed. Okay, so the age of majority before 2012 used to be 18. Okay, so if you're 18 plus, you would be treated as an adult. And post an incident in 2012 and other incidents where it seemed like juveniles were involved in serious, very serious crimes, it was decided that the age of majority is going to be brought down from 18 years to 16 years. Okay, so now you're going to be treated as an adult earlier if you've been heinous crimes. So you may be 17 years old and you may have committed heinous crime, or may have been accused, committed or not happens later. You may have been accused of a heinous crime, and it is possible that the Juvenile Justice Board that deals with these cases decides that the juvenile should be treated as an adult, right? And why does that have consequences? That has consequences because an adult can be given legally much harsher punishment than a juvenile. A juvenile cannot be given a very severe punishment. Okay, could not be, even if the crime was heinous, till a certain point in time. Okay, so it was seen that if you make the punishment severe, right, and this is here achieved indirectly, right? So the signal that you're giving is, well, if you commit heinous crime, we are going to treat you as adults. So we're not going to let you get away as leniently as we were earlier. Now there is the aspect of you being treated as an adult. So your severity of punishment will also be in line with what an adult could face. Okay. So this was this amendment that was brought to the Juvenile Justice Act was the motivation for the work that I've done, and the fact that it seems to be in line with the economic approach was also the motivation. Okay. So, like I said, the age of majority was brought down. Okay. Now, the question or the thing that came to my mind, and it may have come to your mind in other ways today, is that this amendment can act as a deterrent only if potential offenders actually take into account the fact that they will no longer be treated leniently vis-a-vis the adult criminal justice system. And they will only take this into account if they possess that kind of information. Okay. And even if, say, they do face this kind of information, what if the nature of the crime is such that it is, a case of temporary insanity or impulsive crime, or crime under influence of alcohol or influence? This is what we've actually seen in some of the fieldwork that we've done, that when it comes to really heinous crimes, it is seen that it is barely done from the perspective of a completely rational individual. Okay, and this is something that is also recognized within economics, But empirical work is very little on this issue, especially in India, right? Even though the recognition is there, at least by some academicians in the West, right? So if they do take into account this kind of new severity that is being brought into the system, or if they at all, even before that, knew of the fact that, you know, if you're a juvenile offender, you're going to be treated more leniently compared to an adult. If they have this kind of information while they're acting, then yes, this law makes sense, right? But if they don't have that information and there is something else, XYZ, we don't know what it is, it's hard to pinpoint, or it's a number of factors, right? If it's something else that's driving crime and not really the fact that they are going to be treated leniently compared to adults, then we need to relook at things, right? If we need to achieve deterrence. Right? So this is what, the motivation of this work was. And there is some literature, there's quite a bit of literature in this. So I'm not going to go into very much detail. I'm going to just present the findings. I think we have just 5-6 minutes left. So the pioneer, Gary Becker, who was actually a Nobel laureate in economic sciences, Becker is the one who brought forth this idea of minimum probability of apprehension, maximum punishment, precisely what we've seen, derived from a cost-benefit analysis, precisely what we've seen. And this is also what is seen in the dynamic models that I haven't gone through today, but they exist in literature, right? And all these are premised on the assumption of perfect information. And that is exactly the loophole that I'm trying to question empirically. And we'll see how, right? And there is also literature that goes beyond economics. Again, Stephen Levitt is a famous economist who's done a lot of work on crime, especially empirical work on crime in the US, right? He's even written an interesting book called Free Economics. But aside from economists, there are also others who have looked at the information question. So Abrams, for example, did this for the US. And interestingly, he was driven by the same question that I'm being driven by here. And there's also something called the broken windows theory. And this becomes important for us because it goes precisely in the opposite direction of what an economist would prescribe. So the broken windows theory actually prescribes more policing, right? Which means increase the probability of punishment and not necessarily the severity. And this actually, the model that was followed, this was followed in New York when a crime was extremely high and it was brought down from the 1990s by following this very aggressive policing approach. And the idea, the word broken windows is that, think of a place, broken windows, seems like nobody's in charge. It would, make the potential offender feel that, nobody's really going to bother, right? So you replace that with a perfect, a relatively more polished place in the sense it's more systematic. You see police personnel and so on, that's going to deter crime. So that's the kind of reasoning that these academicians were following when they brought this term, a broken windows theory, Wilson and Gelling, and this actually worked, right? And it goes against the idea of our Nobel laureate in economics. Okay. So what is it that my precise question is quickly? So I'm going to try and wrap up in the next 5 to 6 minutes. So controlling for socioeconomic factors, is it the knowledge and information of the relative leniency of the juvenile justice system that drives juvenile crime? Okay. And how are we going to address the question? This is not available in secondary data in the precise form that we need, or in any form actually. So we rely on primary data. And we use the logistic regression, which means that your dependent variable is probability of committing crime, or it's a categorical variable, whether you commit crime or not. So what we do is that we have a sample that comprises of both juvenile offenders and non-offenders who are matched on socioeconomic factors to the extent possible. Okay, and you'll understand this better when you see the table that I'm going to show you. So your dependent variable is whether crime was committed or not. The main independent or explanatory variable of interest is whether the offender or non-offender also, whether the offender had information regarding the relative leniency of the juvenile justice system at the time of committing crime. And in case of the non-offender, who's also part of the sample, but is similar to the offender in most socioeconomic factors, the question is going to be whether they possess this knowledge of the relative leniency of the juvenile justice system in general, okay, because they did not commit crime. And what is it that we saw? That awareness of leniency has no significant impact on the odds of committing crime. That's what this number tells you, okay? And interestingly, there were also other findings. So these are some of the other factors that become important. They both serve as control factors and other variables that become important when we think of crime. Right. Some of the control variables were significant. So you look at the regular use of alcohol or drugs, this is highly significant. Another thing that came out to be significant is whether the potential offender hangs out with adults or not, came out to be significant. And we did see, even in our qualitative fieldwork, that most of the heinous crimes are committed not only in gangs, but in gangs comprising both juveniles and adults. Right? Currently in school or not is also showing a statistically significant impact on committing crime. So if you're not on school, and this matches with how we observe qualitatively that if they are school dropouts, they're more likely to commit crime. And then father's education, mother's education, whether they are currently working or not. Future plan, this brings in the element of the dynamic models that we were talking about, when you're making decisions, you're thinking dynamically, right? So you think about the future when you're making decisions today, right? So awareness of the leniency is not what was driving committing crime. So if you're lessening leniency, or in other words, if you're increasing severity, and that is the avenue that you're trying to follow to achieve deterrence for juvenile crime, that is probably not going to be efficacious, or at least not going to be sufficient enough. So I'm going to skip these graphs. And then the related question of, we talked about the other avenue, which is to increase the probability of apprehension, right? Which can be achieved through policing, more aggressive policing. So specifically, we've tried to see whether higher policing, which would mean more higher costs incurred by the state, but also an avenue of reducing expected punishment, whether this would reduce juvenile crime. We relied on secondary data, compiled them from various sources. And what we saw is that more police, specifically the variable here is police density, which is number of police personnel per unit area at the state level in India. Okay, and we've seen this across time. This is panel data. This actually reduces juvenile crime. Okay, so thank you so much. I am ready to take questions now.
Madam, I have one small question. Like, for these students who are, most of them are like no teenager, or they've just become adults. So how is the role of, like no in general, let's say from your research findings, how is the role of an educated mother or father, or maybe like no schooling, or as you said, no I just saw whether how much significant it is or not, the friends group hanging around and committing crimes. So maybe a few like no
Yeah. So, so the work is still ongoing. So it's, we're still trying to broaden the sample. So far, at least qualitatively, it seemed that the role of mother's education is more important than the role of father, right? But the problem is that if you see in throughout the sample, the both fathers and mothers' education are both very low, right? So yes, intuitively that should work, right? But if we control for other factors as well, so far we have not seen significance. And qualitatively speaking, most of the offenders, if you think of the occupations, that was another variable that we tried to see. The occupation of the father mostly, for example, was say garbage collector, or a street hawker, or the mother would be working, helping out as domestic help, or sometimes not even working. So because this was so uniform in both the case of the offenders as well as the non-offenders, that we did not see statistical significance so far. But yes, I think that at some point, for example, if we bring in more affluent offenders, for example, there have been cases of drivers of fancy cars who are juvenile offenders, then maybe that difference would show up in some way, even though even in that case their parents would be well educated, and there the driving factor would probably be alcohol or diminished decision making ability at that point, and so on.
Mhm. Thank you, madam. I think most of the students are on YouTube, so probably they will not be they are actually cut off from like no straight away asking questions on Zoom, because the Zoom limit is only 100, so that
Yeah.
immediately crossed and so on. So
Yeah.
if anyone is those who are on the Zoom, if anyone is interested in asking question to madam, anyone out there? I think we are not able to see any responses probably. So may I request Dr. Naishal Raval to offer vote of thanks. Professor Naishal Raval. Are you able to join, Professor Naishal Raval? You're muted. Please put the mic is off. Dr. Naishal Raval. NAISH. Nothing.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Please carry on.
Good morning, one and all present over here. I, Dr. Naishal Raval, take this opportunity to present a vote of thanks. Firstly, I would like to thank Shri Sudhir Nanavati sir, the president of GLS University, for providing a wonderful infrastructure facilities. I would also like to thank Principal Dr. Abneesh Shah, the Faculty of Commerce, GLS IC, And a big thank you to you, ma'am, Dr. Malvika Tyagi. It was a value addition for me and my student. The lecture was insightful and new things. Along with this, I would also like to thank Dr. Hastimal Sagra for providing the moral support and the guidance. We would also like to thank Divyesh Parmar and his team for providing a technical support. I once again thank each and everyone who make this webinar a successful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, madam. I'll call you
Yes.
afterwards. I'll call you afterwards.
Thank you. Thanks to all the faculty. Thanks to Principal Dr. Avnisha. And it was great to be here. Thanks so much.
Welcome, most welcome, ma'am. And if you happen to visit Ahmedabad ever, please do visit us.
Absolutely. Yes. Now I have an incentive.
For sure, madam. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Bye-bye.